So Antje was born in 1943. Antje Birgit Hilde von Bormann was born in a place called Teschen. Teschen still is in Poland. It was in German-occupied Poland at the time. And her mother's sister was a mission doctor in Sterkspruit in the Eastern Cape. And because Antje's mother's sister, Doc, came to Sterkspruit as a mission doctor, so some of Antje's sisters and brother came out. Peter was the first to come to South Africa, and slowly Dagmar and Antje followed to South Africa, which is a strange place really for Germans, but it was after the war. And I always remember Antje telling me that she landed in Durban, she studied drama. And she landed in Durban and she would write home and say, South Africa is lovely, it's just freezing here. Except she wouldn't say that, she would swear, because she used to swear quite a lot. And that is where she met my father's sister, Kathy, who is on the line now, and because they were both studying drama. And it was through Kathy that she met Ingo. She married Ingo, I think it was in 72 she married him, and they lived in Hillbrow in a place called the Sentinel. And it was so close to the Hillbrow Tower, we had torches and we could actually shine our lights on the Hillbrow Tower. It was a huge amount of fun for us to do that. I've been racking my brains for the name of this company. She worked for a French company. I got the sense that she was a PA or she was some kind of clerical post. But I remember her being very grumpy one Saturday morning when she had to work on a Saturday morning. But she did speak a little bit of French, and I remember her wanting Ingo to learn French, and they went to the Alliance Française, and for some time there were these beginner French books, L'Horloge, I remember the wristwatch. Why you have to have, Le Montre in fact, the wristwatch. Why you want to have that, I don't know, but that was in the book here to learn French. She also spent a few months, a term or two, teaching German in the south of Johannesburg at a place called the Hill High. If you don't know Johannesburg, the south of Johannesburg is what we call the wrong side of the tracks. It was very, very rough. You know, they used to search the students for weapons when they came on campus, and if they didn't have weapons, they would issue you with weapons. That's a joke, I think. And she was not cut out for high school teaching. She hated the marking. The students took her apart. She was a small woman, and the students took her apart. She didn't really understand how to deal with South African youth. So that didn't last very long, but I remember going to school fete at the Hill High. The Hill High, absolutely. Her parents then decided to give the children their inheritances early, and I think that, I don't know why, but maybe there was a law in Germany that allowed them to do that without the inheritance or donations tax. And she decided to take the money, stop working, and go to law school, which is obviously something she'd always wanted. She went to law school, and I remember driving to the gasworks, past the gasworks when there was exam time, and she would always say, I hope the university has burned down. She hated the exams, and she would drive there, and she would really hope that the university had burned down. I always thought that was unlikely, but she always was very hopeful that she wouldn't have to sit the exam. And of course, she did qualify as a lawyer, and then she also did her pupillage. So what that means is in South Africa, we've got a thing called the split bar. We have barristers and solicitors. We've got lawyers and advocates. And she actually studied to be an advocate, and she did her pupillage in town. And so because of her drama background and because of her legal background, around the dinner table at night, I might start crying.
Oh,
What? We would often have lawyers and actors. Doug would come, some moderately famous actors, thank you so much, and television personalities. So we would always have lawyers, and then Ingo and Antje would debate politics and law. Ingo he loved the law, actually, funnily enough. I always think he was a frustrated lawyer himself. And they would debate these finer points of the law. And she went into criminal law, which I always found interesting. A tiny little woman, and she would tell us the stories around the dinner table of these horrific crimes that the defendants had been accused of, but horrific murders and things. And she would just tell us these things matter of fact. And so we would pass our evenings. Sometimes she would smoke, and we would drink a lot of port and play a lot of bridge. And that was a great joy to us. I've actually covered this. I was chatting to her the other day, actually, at Christmas, and she said during the struggle she defended a lot of ANC members, and she did a lot of pro bono work for the Black Sash and for the struggle. And after the struggle, the ANC never briefed her after that, which was always a bit of a disappointment, I think, for her. And I remember she reminded me, I don't actually remember, but she reminded me that I drove her on a circuit to Nebo, which is in the Northwest Province somewhere. And we spent the day, and I drove her in that great big 407 or 704, whatever, that huge, great, big, enormous Peugeot that we had. And we went round, and she was a very dedicated defense lawyer. I always used to think of Rampo at the bar. That's an obscure literary reference from the 1970s. Thank you for laughing. She ended her career as a judge's assessor. And what that means, I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, tried by the full bench. That's what that means. So it's a very senior position. There would be a judge, and then there would be advocates who are very senior advocates, and they would help the judge interpret the finer points of the law and also the evidence. And she loved this work. She learned quite good Afrikaans. She spoke quite good Afrikaans, funny enough, and she spoke Zulu. She learned Zulu. She didn't speak it, but she did learn it, and she learned it well enough that if the interpreters were talking rubbish, she would say to the interpreter, "That's not what he said. That's not what he said." So she knew enough to make sure that the evidence that she was receiving and that the judge was receiving was indeed accurate. And she would often complain about the level of interpreters in South Africa. So she obviously spoke French, and she spoke quite German anyway, quite good Afrikaans, and a little bit of Zulu. She never really spoke about her childhood. She never really spoke about it at all. Only a few fragments remain. I remember her telling us about this family that she stayed with after the war. And when we went to Germany in 1984, we went to visit this family in the south of Germany. And when she spoke German, which was very, very seldom, she would speak to her parents. She spoke on one other occasion. I'll tell you about that. She spoke to her parents very occasionally, to one of her brothers or sisters, when she just got grumpy and wanted to be understood. But when she spoke German, there was every now and then a little bit of a southern Bavarian mannerism in her German. She would say "gell," which is not a very North German thing to say. It's a Bavarian thing to say. The only time I heard her speak German, not to one of her family members, was when she spoke to me. She broke her hip. We were at Rob Douglas and Geraldine's house one day for lunch, and she stumbled and fell, and she broke her hip. And Bassam, funnily enough, was the surgeon who replaced her hip. And I went to see her at the Edenvale Hospital. And she said, "Where's Ingo?" She would say that a lot, "Where's Ingo?" And she spoke to me in German. And I thought she must be really quite out of it, really quite sedated, that she's speaking to me in German. Who she thought I was, I'm not sure. But fortunately, I speak the language well enough that I could respond and give her medicine or whatever she needed. We're going to play Nikolai, who's the firstborn, obviously, of Antje and Ingo. And then I'd like Myra and Frederick to speak. So these are the children of Ingo and Antje, yeah?
Dear Mum, a few months ago I was in the National Gallery at Trafalgar Square. I got to see my first Monet in person, along with a host of other beautiful paintings by so many names that are familiar to me because of you. I remember wondering if I would know or care who Botticelli, Monet, Manet, Van Gogh et al. Were if it wasn't for you dragging Frederick and me around as small children to every bloody art opening there was. God, we hated it. But it was worth it. I cannot tell you how much I loved being in the gallery, nor describe the sense of wonder I felt at seeing these paintings we had spoken about with you as children. It wasn't just a love of paintings. Prokofiev's Peter and the Willful always remind me not only of my childhood, but of my first introduction to the power and joy of music. It's never gone away. Music is still the way I express how I am feeling, what the world is and how I relate to it. Without Peter and Co., I'm not sure I would. I'm so glad I've got classical music, ballet, books, thank you, words, learning, and the English language as gifts from you. Though, despite your best efforts and 2 thoroughly miserable afternoons, I will never be a fan of opera, nor Lawrence of Arabia. 6 fecking hours of looking at sand. Never again. Unfortunately, all the beauty in the world, including your own, which you couldn't see, couldn't push back the loneliness which even as a young boy I knew you suffered from. Mum, I didn't know how to help you. My helplessness gave way to frustration and eventually to resentment. I know every therapist will say it was up to you, but every child feels they should have done more. Ultimately, I'm sorry you lived alone for so long. I'm sorry that Liam will never get to be dragged around art galleries with you. nor taken to Carmen while I invent a barely plausible excuse to avoid it. It's time to say goodbye, Mum. And the only words I have aren't mine. Sometimes solutions aren't so simple. Sometimes goodbye is the only way. I hope the sun will set for you. Rest in peace, Mum.
Can I sit here? I met Antje in 1970 when she rescued me. I will not bore you with the details of how I found myself after 5 years in England in a downtown hotel in Johannesburg with 5 rand to my name. Antje, who had never met me, heard of my plight through a mutual acquaintance. The next morning there she was, paying the hotel bill, scooping me up and taking me to the Sentinel, her flat in Hillbrow. I could say from that day on we were friends, but it was much more than that. We had an unbreakable bond that endures to this day and beyond. When Ingo and Antje married in 1973, it set off a domino effect. Michael, a cousin and a confirmed bachelor, married Roseanne in 1974, and Peter and I married in 1975. This meant that our children were able to grow up together and form lasting bonds. Antje loved being with the family, and to quote one of her favourite expressions, we had super times together. Her best place on earth was the Kruger Park, where we would meet for holidays. I remember one occasion making tea in a small tin teapot before dawn, and when the rest of the camp was asleep, and being so glad to be able to share this with her. We also went to Hazyview and took sun-filled walks down to the river with the children. Once, when John and Chris and Philippa were out from England, 5 families got together at the Kruger Park on holiday. We had a wonderful time sitting round the campfires and listening to family anecdotes and the sound of laughter in the warm summer nights. Not known to be an animal lover, on holiday to Funnystone, our cousins' farms, the children were given a tiny white kitten whom they now named Arctic. It was left to Antje to care for said kitten. It turned out that the kitten needed to be bottle-fed. Antje took this very seriously, and once when she had to be away, Arctic was given to me to look after. He came with a list of instructions about mixing the formula, adding raw egg, and feeding times. At the end of the day, I returned Arctic to an anxious Antje, only to receive an irate phone call asking me if I still had one of Arctic's bottles. If Antje adored Arctic, he adored her in return and would howl outside the bathroom door if he could not find her. My acknowledgement in the peppermill to Antje is a small public way to honour her. How do you thank someone who made it possible to realize a lifelong hope? I would not be a published author if it was not for Antje's belief that I was a writer. This she backed up with badly typed pages full of mistakes and turned them into a presentable manuscript. When the Peppermill first failed to be published, Antje was undeterred. She simply waited for me to write another book. Once again she was confronted by many pages full of errors. Once again she set about typing and correcting what I had given her. This was to be a labour of love, a collaboration that for both of us was hugely rewarding. A truly special time as we sat together, and A Painted Sky, the book that Antje loved, took shape. One of my most endearing memories of Antje was when I turned up one night at her flat with a man she'd never seen or heard of and announced that we were going to get married. Typical of her innate good manners and sense of occasion, Antje's only response was, "How marvellous!" And she was right. I have fought with Antje, admired her, despaired of her, and shed many tears for her. But in the end, the only thing that mattered was that I loved her. Go well, dearest Antje. Be free and in peace in your beloved park.
Frederick, I'm going to hand over to you, I think. Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks, everyone. So I'm not going to say so much because my tributes have all been done for the garage. It has been a difficult time for us, but at times like this, it's important to realize what you're grateful for. And I'm grateful that my parents were both good looking and and they love their families. They both did. So I would like to just particularly say that not just our blood family, but other families that have come through for us, like Lightwell, who helped my dad so much, and some of my friends, one of who's just arrived. But and well, the thing about my parents is that they're always very welcoming of people. So that's will be one of the things that I take from them. There's obviously too much to mention now, but I just want to explain that there's the door outside there where I put Mom and Dad's picture that says "Thank you, Mom and Dad." That's not just me thanking Mom and Dad, but it's also them thanking you guys for being part of their life. So I'd also like to specifically thank my Uncle Conrad and Roland and Peyton, because they really, and Karen and Peyton, because they really spent a lot of time with my mom and dad, and they took them out and they really made their last couple of years really special. So I would like to particularly mention that, and I'd also like to thank my aunt Ingrid, who isn't here. She just left, but she also made sure that they had a holiday in the Kruger Park, which they loved. And so, but again, I think if you do go to the garage and see the photos, it's very clear that my mom and my dad, they love their families a lot. And that will always be a very special value for me to take forward. So thanks again to everyone. All right.
60s. But the little story that I want to tell you, very short. One day, she said, come with me to Sterkspruit, sorry, to meet Doc. Okay, we said, my first wife, Yvonne, and I, because she was greater friends with Antje at that time than I was, we got into, you've been having transport stories, we got into her brown, dirty brown Volkswagen Beetle. And we left, and I'm sure it was kind of late in the afternoon, to go to Sterkspruit from Durban. So we were driving through the night, and this is midwinter, and the roads to Sterkspruit, close to Sterkspruit, were just mud roads in those days, and it was raining. Sorry?
Still are.
Still are. There we go. And so there was the Beetle waving through this muddy road to Sterkspruit. Anyway, we finally got to Doc's place, and guess what? Doc also had a Volkswagen Beetle. And the next day, Doc took us on a trip around her little vicinity, her neighborhood, where she saw people, she visited people, and she had a clinic as well there. And she drove probably at about 80, 90 kilometers an hour, which is not excessive, except she never got out of second gear. That's my story.
When she died, she was retired. The judge that she had worked with for many, many years, his name is Geraldine, she was a very senior member of the bar and a very respected member of the bar. And I think she had a long and illustrious career, really, if you think about it. Very, very life. I would like to raise a glass.
Oh my God.
To Antje.
To Antje.